Hi, guys. Welcome to Horizon Podcast, episode 27, a podcast empowering women to heal, overcome trauma, and embrace change. Through our community, we strive to inspire women to create a future where they lead with love, confidence, and courage, helping break boundaries and reach new horizons. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today, we have retired lieutenant from San Bernardino PD, right?
Correct.
Mike Madden here.
Correct.
Thank you for coming in, Mike. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm good.
Once again, thank you for coming in and making time to come speak to us. Let's see here. Mike, can you share a little bit about your background and what led you to serve in law enforcement?
That's a loaded question. I think I always wanted to be a police officer when I was growing up. I found myself always being attracted to police shows on television and things like that. After my parents got divorced, my mom dated a police sergeant with the San Bernardino Police Department.
Oh, wow.
I just idolized everything about him and how that worked and what he did for a career. And so from a very young age, I believe I was 8, 9 years old at that time, I was thinking that's what I want to do with my life. But I had no other law enforcement officers in the family. I was the first and only to this point, and from a family perspective. And to be honest, I wasn't getting a whole lot of support from my friends and family. When I talked about, as I was going through high school and graduating and getting ready to go into college, I was still gravitating and telling people, I think I want to be a cop. But again, people were, why do you want to do that?
Right.
And, you're never going to make a ton of money doing that, Mike. You could do better for yourself. And so I kind of let the naysayers get to me to a degree, and went to Cal State, San Bernardino, ended up getting my degree in business. And so I was, okay, that's fine. I'm going to be chasing a life in the business community.
Okay.
And
it wasn't for you.
I found myself making such half-hearted attempts, really, probably even setting myself up for failure rather than success, because I think deep down I still had that burning desire to want to be a cop.
Okay.
And especially an officer in the city of San Bernardino, where I was born and raised. And that just seemed like the natural fit in my mind. So I processed with the city, and they weren't hiring at the time. So I ended up getting hired by the city of Claremont, which the city of Claremont is in LA County, small college community, and an incredibly great community in which to work and to police, but it's small, it's quiet.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it wasn't home for me. My home was San Bernardino.
Okay.
And so after 22 months in Claremont, the department was hiring again. And so I made the decision to lateral over. And then I spent the next remaining 25 years of my career with the city of San Bernardino.
Okay. So you ended up working for the county that you were born and raised in.
Yeah. Not only the county, but the city.
The city as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Where did you start off when you first came in? I know you were in Claremont and then you transferred over to San Bernardino. What is that called? Field or? I
served in a variety of different capacities, which you find most officers do to some degree in their career.
Okay.
And San Bernardino was large enough to where you could do different things and have other opportunities. Certainly, it's nothing like the size of an LAPD, and some of the specialized units that a department of that size and magnitude have. But still, there was enough happening within the city. So I started out in patrol, like all young officers do. Started out in patrol. From there, I actually went to bicycle mounted enforcement team for about a year, and that was great. People know you rode around on a bike, but it was a real good way to interact with the community. And I think I probably made more arrests doing that because people don't expect you to be pulling up on a bicycle, and so that was an interesting part of my career. From there, I was designated as a field training officer. So I'd had enough time and experience on to where they wanted me to train new officers coming onto the job. So I served in that capacity as well. I went, and then I turned to the dark side, probably, as some people would say, because I became a motor officer. The heinous motor officers that, oh my gosh, this guy's going to give me a ticket. And so, so I was a motor officer for 4 years. And with that, I also we didn't have a MATE team, a major accident investigations team, but I was on, we didn't have one in title, but I was on our emergency response team. So all of the fatal collisions, I went and handled those along with a couple of the other officers assigned to the unit as well. When I promoted to detective, then that was when I went to the Detective Bureau, which I know we're going to spend some time talking about. And I started my career in the Specialized Crimes Unit, which I know you want to dive deeper into that, but just giving the listeners a little overview. Specialized Crimes Unit serves we focus upon crimes against children. So children who are physically or sexually abused, and also domestic violence related concerns, and all sex crime related incidents that happen within the city of San Bernardino. So dealing with some real traumatic, volatile issues in that unit, but certainly a very important unit, and one that really requires some specialization to hopefully bring the best possible outcome for that particular case and for the wellness of all the involved parties. And from there, I promoted out to a sergeant. And I went back to patrol as a supervisor now, overseeing patrol. And after about a year and a half, I got what I thought was going to be my dream job and maybe where I would finish out my career. And I was placed back in the Specialized Crimes Unit again, this time as a supervisor. So I wasn't handling a daily case load. I was overseeing the detectives who were handling those case loads, and I was making certain that, everybody was, anything and everything we could do to assist them in that endeavor, that was my responsibility.
Wow, you were absolutely involved in a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and when I said I probably, because that was a really rewarding position to be in. And probably could have finished my career out in that spot, but I decided that I would take the next promotional exam, and I didn't think I would get promoted to lieutenant, but I just figured I'll prepare myself for down the road, and I guess the joke was on me because I ended up getting promoted. And so I then went and spent the remaining 5 years of my career serving as a lieutenant with the department, which is a management position. You have a history there. Yeah, a little bit of experience in a number of different areas.
For sure.
I was never cool enough to be a SWAT guy, but other than that, I also served as a hostage negotiator for our department. I served in that capacity for 15 years. I became a hostage negotiator. Then I was the supervisor, one of the supervisors for the hostage negotiations team. And then I was the commander of the unit itself overall as an auxiliary duty or assignment. And as so with the field training officer unit, I was a field training officer, became a supervisor for the field training officer program, and then ultimately the commander of the overall field training officer program.
Wow, Mike, do you have a resume?
Yeah.
You sure do. You sure do. Okay, so you said you worked in crimes against children. What made you transition into that field, into that task force?
To be honest, at first, I was when you promote, they're gonna tell you where you're gonna go. You don't really get to pick or choose, so you go where there's an opening. And at the time, there was an opening in the crimes against children unit, and I found myself immediately not by any means enamored with the position, but I found that it was where I needed to be and wanted to be.
Okay.
And the reason was that crimes against children, unfortunately, the perpetrators of those crimes are oftentimes family members, oftentimes friends and known individuals to the children. And I had victims as young as 6 months old.
Wow. That's heartbreaking.
And those are truly, if you're a victim of a crime, you're the victim of a crime.
Right.
But when you have a little 5-year-old girl who's being victimized now and being sexually abused by, her father, her uncle, that is a true victim. And
yes.
if there is somebody who needs to have an advocate, if there's somebody who needs to have somebody go to bat for them and bring justice to them and bring, safety
yes.
to their life, then I think that's an honorable cause.
I agree with you on that, because they can't fend for themselves. They're truly victims, honestly, and they're taken advantage of. And it's so sad to see it from the people closest to them. The ones that are supposed to be protecting them are actually harming them.
Unfortunately true.
What are some of the most common types of child abuse case law enforcement encounters, and what are the warnings?
Between physical and sexual abuse, when I was investigating the crimes, keep in mind that, and a few years have passed since that time. Yeah. So I'm going back on, data that might be expired, okay. It certainly is not at an end date. But historically, what we saw was that about 35 to 40% of our cases were sexual abuse, and the other 65% were physical abuse.
Okay.
And so you would just see oftentimes the patterns that you would see, particularly when it was somebody within the home who was the abuser. Commonly, as you see, unfortunately, in domestic violence cases as well, drugs and alcohol may be a strong factor because this person is already making the incredibly poor judgment call to be abusive, either physically or sexually to a child. And now when their inhibitions are lowered due to alcohol or drug abuse or a combination thereof, that can just exacerbate the condition.
Okay. What age range or demographics were more vulnerable in your experience?
Well, the hardest cases for when we were talking about children, the hardest cases there are children who may not be as verbally capable yet, or they haven't really developed the ability to communicate effectively.
Right.
So when you're talking about a 3 to 5 year old, or maybe even a 6 or 7 year old, depending upon how developmentally how developed this child is, because if they're being abused, that may also stunt their ability to,
yes.
And so to communicate effectively. So communication skills are problematic in those investigations, and anytime that type of heinous crime is taking place, that's taking place with the offender and the victim alone and isolated. It's not as if there's witnesses to this.
Of course.
So because of that, it becomes physical evidence is incredibly important for us to gather. And then secondly would be the victim's own statements, or if we can get a suspect that we can confess or persuade that that's the proper thing to do, then those are all key components to being able to have a successful prosecution and outcome.
But I mean, like you stated, some of the children, they clearly can't. So you're relying on evidence that might not be there, and then on the communication of the children to say what has been done, but that might not be there either. So it just makes the case hard.
Absolutely. And the difficulty for your average officer going out and being the initial responding officer will be that officer may or may not, he or she may not have a lot of specialization in how to deal with those particular issues. Yeah. And so you have an already traumatized child. You have a child who, may not be as verbally capable as you would like, but it's not as if when we get a report that they call me and I just go out. I have to wait until that report, when I was serving as a detective, I would wait until that report hit my desk, or if the crime was heinous enough and there was enough evidence of severe trauma, then they would do a call out. So they would call us out to the scene and okay, we need to get out there and start working on this immediately. But for the most part, most of our cases were generated by patrol officers. So, how much information those officers were able to glean from that. Sometimes they may or may not even choose to talk to the victim themselves.
Yeah.
It just depends. It depends upon how open, the age of the child, first and foremost. It depends upon how open that child is to potentially being spoken to.
Right.
And then you also run the risk of potentially hurting the investigation, because you may be putting words in the child's mouth for them, and you may be opening the door for defense later to say, you persuaded the child to say this. You didn't, this wasn't what actually happened. And so you had to be careful and cognizant of all those things. And I found that as a detective, I got pretty darn good at talking with the kids. And we utilized a services called the Children's Assessment Center in San Bernardino, which was an incredible service, not just for us, but they were for all agencies within the county. And they were incredible. And they had licensed clinicians who would do the interviews, the interviews of the kids. And we would watch these interviews through a two-way mirror and monitor them. And they would take breaks and come and say, okay, is there something else we should be asking? And you just pick up on so many of the techniques and the ability that they have with the child, because a child, depending again upon a child may not even understand necessarily proportional things like, well, he touched me on top of my clothing. Okay, where is the top? Put a piece of paper out. Okay, show me the top. Touch me underneath. Okay, well, what's underneath? They'll, if they lift up and they understand and have that kind of ability to communicate effectively, then, we call that prepositional awareness. And so do they understand some of those dynamics? And as a detective, I found myself just getting better and better at that all the time.
So with every case, you just found something new that you would grasp and take in?
Yes and no. Okay. There were similarities in a lot of cases, unfortunately. But each case is unique. But unfortunately, one of the things that, and I'm probably jumping ahead of myself a little bit here, but I served as a detective in that unit for 3 years, and as I said, I got pretty experienced in it. I was starting to become very good at my job. Being able to, I had very few suspects actually try to go to trial. Those guys, they pled out because they knew that they were going down. They didn't want to face a jury of their peers, and when they were pleading out, they weren't pleading out to, 2 years. These guys are going to jail for, 10, 15 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And depending upon the heinousness of the offense, but, so that part was rewarding. And also I got pretty good at talking with the suspects as well, and getting people to confess and admit. And that's interesting.
That's a skill in itself, because that doesn't happen, but they don't trust police officers. They see you as an enemy. So the 100%. Fact that you were able to do that says a lot about you.
I remember being in the academy, and we got a very small block of instruction. I think it was probably, we probably got a week's worth of instruction on doing those types of interviews and interrogations.
Okay.
And I remember a detective coming in and talking about working crimes against children. And when he started talking about some of the interview skills and techniques, it just seemed creepy almost. It was like, I would want to jump across the table and punch this guy out. How can you try to ingratiate yourself to them? How can you try to, look him in the eye and say, you understand? But unfortunately, to a certain degree, if you come in with hostility in these interviews with these guys, I say guys, perpetrators could be females as well, but overwhelmingly the perpetrators were male. If you go in with that kind of hostility and already a predisposed notion of what transpired or the outcome, they're just they're not gonna talk to you. They're gonna shut down.
Defensiveness. So shut down.
They'll become immediately defensive and they will shut down. And so you have to try to find some common ground, and you have to utilize not necessarily compassion or empathy, but certainly you can't go in there showing disgust. And I tell you all this because I found that I got better and better at that, whether I was talking to a child and getting more acclimated and used to it, or dealing with the suspect. And I liked what it said about me as an investigator.
Yeah.
But I had small children myself at the time.
Okay. So how did you working? That's a great point. You as a father and you out in the field and seeing this.
Yeah.
How do you separate the two, but at the same time, as a father, it's hard not to. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
100%. Because when I very first started in the unit, I saw the works of the works. I would go in and like I told you, I would look at the reports that had been generated by our patrol officers, and I'd be reading something. And I'd just feel my blood pressure rising. I'd feel my, some pressure. You're going to start to shake and your jaw clenches because it's like, I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to, tear him apart. And I found that as I went, I was getting, as I progressed over that period of the 3 years, it was hard for me to be surprised anymore. It was hard for me to be that almost not necessarily rage, but the passion that you feel about, oh my gosh, this is just heinous. That waned, and that was good because again, you have to be impartial. You have to come in with a level head if you really want to have a successful outcome in an investigation. And you can't let your personal biases or anything impact your final work product and how the outcome. So I loved what it said about me as a detective, that I wasn't shocked to the core every time I saw something. For the most part, still there would be an occasional thing that would just be, wow, that's so heinous. But I hated what it said about me as a person, and especially as a dad. I didn't like the fact that I didn't want ever to have that kind of, not necessarily detachment, but have that play into my personal life and who I wanted to be for my kids. And so,
how did you separate the two?
That was when it was time to go do something different.
Okay. That was a question there.
That was when and the timing was right. It worked well. I promoted to sergeant, and so when you promote to sergeant, I went back out into patrol, and and so you kind of get a break.
Yes.
But then when I got to go back in as the supervisor, I think because I had served in that capacity, handling the caseload, I had knowledge. I was coming in to where I could be useful to those other detectives. Hey, you know what? I know from personal experience that this might work in this case. Here's some guidance that, I can give you, or maybe we're going down the wrong path here or whatever it may be. So it came full circle again to where I still got to be involved in those cases, but I didn't have to get so personally, emotionally involved day in and day out.
You were still helping at a different level.
Correct.
Okay. That's It's amazing. What are some of the warning signs that public often overlooks on child abuse?
I think we've gotten much better at recognizing things than we used to be.
Okay.
Whether it's educators, oftentimes it'll be teachers who are, seeing signs of abuse. But for family members, we call them RPs, reporting parties. Who's the person who is picking up the phone and calling and saying, hey, there's something going on here. Sometimes we found that although the mother in the household wasn't involved in the abuse, whether it was sexual or physical, she maybe turned a blind eye to it.
They enabled the abuser to continue doing that.
Yeah, they were being complicit at the very minimum, because they worry about, well, where are we going to live? How are we going to eat? If he goes to jail. And so they would try and sweep things under the rug that maybe they should have been seeing, and or certainly should have been seen.
Yeah.
And those things, that's why it's so important that we have relationships with our children. We understand, and 100%. you can't tell when somebody's acting oddly if you're not aware enough of how they act normally.
If they don't even know them.
Yeah, you don't know them. So 100%. If you're just turning a blind eye to your kids, then you're doing yourself them a disservice. And so we need to look for those things. We all have off days. We're all but now when we find that our child's being disassociated, we find that their grades are slipping. All of a sudden
there's signs.
There are warning signs. There's absolutely things that are happening. We need to be paying attention and getting out in front of those things.
Now, what would be? I think that's also easier said than done, though, because a lot of parents they're parents. I don't know if they know exactly how to parent, and that's not for. I'm not. I'm speaking for a specific type of parenting, obviously what we're talking about here. So what is the I would say, I'm not even percentage, but I guess percentage that was a case where they were turning the blind eye and family members knew?
More times than you would want for there to be, that's for sure. And unfortunately, putting an exact percentage on it would be a little difficult given the time,
Yeah, of course.
I've served in there, but I would have to say probably a third of my case, there were indicators that people could and should have been picking up on. So, that's pretty significant.
Do they get held accountable for knowing?
Oh, absolutely. If we can show, then they, even if they never themselves laid hand on the child,
yes,
then absolutely they could be indicted. And I know that just like we had a crimes against children unit in our office, there was a crimes against children unit in the DA's office as well. Okay. So those prosecutors dealt with the same issues. So we would pick up the phone and call them directly and say, hey, we've got this. And by the way, mom knows, or aunt knows, or grandma knows, or whatever. Okay. Well, we need to, and they could absolutely be responsible and held accountable for impeding that investigation, for being a co-conspirator oftentimes. And, they 136.1 is tampering with a witness, dissuading your child to, if anybody comes and asks you anything, you don't say a word. And, so those things absolutely were factors.
That's good to know. Okay. I just thought that they get a warning and they weren't able to be prosecuted, because I'm like, to me, I feel like they're accomplice to the abuse.
No, yes. Now, I'm not saying that's the case in all cases.
Right.
Particularly if it's a stranger who is the abuser. they're the suspect in our case. But it generally in the home, if it's happening, and it's happened more than one time, those types of things certainly raise some red flags with us.
Okay. In the field you were in, you stated that there was, in the crimes unit,
specialized crimes.
In the specialized crimes, there's 3 different divisions that you specialized in. DV was also one of them.
Correct. And then all sex-related crimes, except for adult victims.
Okay. Now, what similarities would you say that those 3 have?
If you're a victim of a crime, it's a traumatic experience. But if you're a victim of one of those 3 crimes, it's a very personally traumatic experience as well. Because, now we're dealing with the touch at the very essence of vulnerability and safety and wellness. Certainly if you're a victim of a homicide or a robbery, those same issues are touched upon, but you have a different degree of emotional trauma from, if you're a victim of abuse and domestic violence, or if you're the victim of a rape or some kind of sexual assault, and certainly as a child being the victim of physical abuse or sexual abuse. Those are extremely traumatic situations in which to be. And so I think from that aspect, some of the investigators who are assigned to those units, they really, you shouldn't put just anybody in there. You shouldn't just put a body in there. You should put somebody who's passionate about wanting to learn, wanting to, as I said, I developed skills and became a better and better investigator from as time went by. But so those for investigating all 3 of those categories, it was necessary to have that kind of training and experience and buy-in from your people. Because, if they're only coming at it from a half-hearted aspect, then they're not doing themselves, the department, or most importantly, the victims any good. So we need to make certain that we're putting the right people in the right spots.
How does the law enforcement know that? Because, I know you stated that everyone has to do a little bit of everything, I think, if I'm not mistaken, right? So it's kind of like you have to complete this to move on to the next, right? Sometimes I would say the police officers may disassociate themselves from it and not really, like you said, care to, especially I believe in DV calls. I'm within the community, so I feel like I hear that often where officers are really, they're not as sensitive to it as they should be. And me being a survivor as well, I've dealt with having to call police officers a lot of times. And what I did realize is that a lot of them don't like paperwork. So that holds back a lot. This is my own experience and what I saw. It's San Bernardino County as a whole, but different cities, because I had to call from different cities. And what held back a lot their help for me was the paperwork. They were not fan of the paperwork. It's not, but I'm like, that's part of the job. And I'm sorry, but I don't feel safe. I have this or whatever. So I know that you said you have to care. And I feel like those are a few of.
Yeah, unfortunately, officers. There's sometimes where we don't do as good a job as we could and should be doing. And certainly the level of call volumes that you have will sometimes dictate how much time and effort you can put into a particular investigation. San Bernardino, the city of San Bernardino, for those who are aware, is a very busy city from a law enforcement perspective. And conversely, a city like Claremont, a domestic violence call, that may have been an entire shift for me investigating a call of that magnitude, to where just because we didn't have the number of calls for service, and we could afford to invest all of that time on the front end, where you have officers. It's not uncommon in the city of San Bernardino to be holding 50 or 60 calls for service, to where you have people waiting for an officer and it taking, hours sometimes to get an officer.
That's very true.
And so when they come, They may seem abrupt. They may seem standoffish.
Oh,
they
for
may
sure.
seem dismissive. And I'm not saying that that's okay. It's not.
No, but I understand. To me, it got to a point because I was very persistent, and I know that it can, there's only so much they could do. I understand that. And after speaking to a certain amount of different officers, I got to understand that from their perspective too, because I were to ask questions, but there's only so much that you guys also can do based on the laws and things like that. So I understand that too. And I remember speaking to officers where, they, you know what, or I would call, I actually wouldn't even call 911. I ended up getting the number to, I believe, the dispatch. And I would tell them, this is not an emergency, but this is what's going on, because it was to me was documentation for everything for my case, for the restraining order. So I remember taking action in that sense. And finally, I think after so many calls, because I would call if I was in Rancho, I would call if I was in Ontario, I would call if I was up in Victorville area. And finally is when I think so much persistency, and they were like, you know what, okay, he's broken this and that. And they took the time, but it was, like you said, the traffic of, I remember one of them actually, he's like, you know what, I have to go. I have to leave. There's a robbery down the street. And I was like, okay. And then they would call me back, after. And I understood after so many calls, I understood I'm limited to what they can do. They are doing their job to an extent as well. And I have to just do my part as well. So I would try to have everything ready by the time they came and give it to them and be like, when you have time, give me the order. Like I got to learn a little bit of how you guys work and what you can and can't do in DV cases.
Yeah, you're definitely you're not hitting a nerve by any means, but you're hitting on something that I'm pretty passionate about. People don't call the police because they're having a good day.
Right.
That's not like, hey, I want to share my favorite recipe with you. Okay.
Right.
I mean, they're calling because something bad has happened in their life, and they have an expectation that an officer is going to come, and that an officer is going to at least act as if they're concerned about what's happening in their life. And when you get anything less than that, then that just is that unfortunately puts a bad blemish on law enforcement as a whole. Correct. I'm a huge advocate for cops. I'm a huge advocate for law enforcement, but I'm also realistic, and I'm also, as a manager,
Thank you.
I would commonly look at, as a supervisor and a manager, I would commonly look at, was there something more that we could and should have done here?
Yeah.
And you have to certainly take into account that, hey, we're stretched thin, but we can do more. And, and if there's that particular instance where we could, then let's give it an effort. And I'm not now. I think one of the things that does become problematic, especially in domestic violence cases, is that where you may get some complacency from officers is that, wow, this is the 8th time I've been back here in the last month, and yet you continue. And oh, by the way, every time the DA calls and says, do you want to do something? You just, you decline, or you say, I didn't tell the officer that, so you're probably going to get a little bit of apathy on the other end.
Right.
It's like you said, you took proactive action.
I did.
You jumped in and you were like, hey, I want this to stop. And
I would call them, but it wasn't because I was in the situation. It was just, I think it was I was learning the laws too, because mine was stalking and harassment online. And it was a lot of like, he was trying to take my identity as well. So it was more in that sense as well. It was because for everything, it's like, he has to be here for us to be able to come. But I'm like, well, what if it's, he entered, I had to close my bank account. So, I know that they're limited to what they can do. And I feel like as a victim, we don't understand that either. We're just like, why aren't you helping me in that sense? Now, after me being through all that and having to be persistent and doing my own research and, like you say, advocating for myself, I learned how to not make it easier, but kind of for them to help me. And I remember I would have stacks of proof and just be like, here it is, give me the report number. And just when you can. And then I would call follow up. Like I did do a lot of the work as well to stay safe and keep my family safe. But I know that it's a two-way street too, so.
Yeah. Again,
Okay, but to be fair, okay, Mike, I recently learned this. Is it true that a lot of police officers tend to lose their lives mostly in domestic abuse calls?
Yes. The number of officer-involved fatalities,
yes,
from a national perspective, the statistics just show that the highest degree of incidents, and I can't even quote I can't quote a percentage right now, but I know it's an overwhelming percentage, are from domestic violence related concerns. And again, because there's several factors that go into that. You already have an extremely emotional and high tense situation. Okay, you're going to a family dispute, and as stated before, drugs and alcohol oftentimes come into play.
Right.
You're going into an unknown environment as an officer. So this is this person's home.
Yes.
They know where all their weapons are.
Yes.
You don't. They have ready access to those things.
Right.
So, now you're already perceived as being the enemy. They're not happy that you're there.
Right.
And, they may or may not even want you, they're not going to want you even on their property, much less coming into their home. And you walk into that, and sometimes that can be a recipe for disaster. One thing I want to hit on, though, and this is something I would beat my drum over with officers. And if we have any cops out there listening, this is for you guys. I know expediency sometimes mandates that we got to wrap this up as quick as possible. So you talk to him, I'll talk to her, and we're going to find out. Right. We'll put this all together and go from there. Preliminarily, that's fine. Just to get an idea. Okay, what did she say? Wait a second, that's not what he said. But I want the officer who's interviewing the victim and the witnesses to ultimately be the one who goes back and interviews the suspect, because you can't tell if a person's lying if you don't know what the truth was to begin with. Okay? You've got to get the full perspective of the investigation.
Okay.
And a lot of cops will say, "Oh, you're talking out. You're full of it, Mike. You don't know what you're talking about." But if you want a successful prosecution, if you want a successful outcome to your case, spend that little bit of extra time doing the interviews yourself, and that way, maybe the next officer will pick up the next investigation. So, and you'll have less on the back end of that one, but it's just how we have to do our jobs better and smarter, and more effectively. And that is one of the huge things that I would tell officers all the time.
That's great. Like you said, there is officers that are passionate about it and that they do it because they care. And I remember running into, I will never forget. I think he was a deputy that I don't know if he felt bad for me or he got tired of me calling him, but he cared enough to want to help me and put in everything that had been going on. So I was able to get a stalkment and harassment case with all the evidence, because there was a lot of evidence as well. But the point is, he took the time to care enough and keep me safe and proceed. But I also was very persistent. And like you said, that you guys have a lot of traffic. There's so much going on in San Bernardino County, and it's such a huge county. So I feel like also for the victims, you have to also fend for yourself. And in that case, is advocate and be as persistent as you possibly can, even if that's calling over and over and over and over. Because that's how a lot of people are like, well, the laws aren't here for us. The officers aren't here for us. Like, there's a lot of negativity behind it. And to an extent, I agree. But at the same time, as I also made sure to do and advocate for myself. And I was persistent for my safety. And I was serious about, I want to be left alone and I need the law to do what it needs to do. But I believe it's not just on you guys, but it's also on us. It's a little bit of as a team, I guess. I don't know if I'm even saying it right, but
to get from your perspective and what I think was happening with you, it's a lot of times an officer may say, "Oh, this is just a 653M," which is an annoying or harassing phone call. Okay, which is unfortunately in the eyes of the court now, it's a misdemeanor and not gonna get a lot of attention or traction in our already overburdened court system. So, but now when you start talking about a 647.6 and you start getting into a stalking case, now that has teeth to it. And a simple thing that wasn't as prevalent back when I started in policing is a simple thing now is we all have cell phones. Okay.
Yes.
When he's sending you these calls, when this bozo's, repeatedly texting or calling you and leaving, messages, don't just delete those. We want those.
No,
that's evidence.
Save everything.
Save everything. Document. So that way, when you do call the police, and he's called me 14 times in the last 3 days.
Yes.
Then so that's important evidence for us to be able to have, and just technology just easy for us to gather.
Especially with, I believe now, a lot of the cases are online cases where the harassment is a lot online.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think it would be in person because, with social media and everything being online, I feel like the harassment and a lot of I feel like it's online now. Mm-hmm. So to me, I was very persistent in, like you said, evidence. I learned that very quickly. They don't listen to you unless you have evidence, and notate everything, report everything. Even if it's a call and he broke it, report it. Because at the end of the day, they do write it down. It's not, yes, you're limited to what you could do, but it's still written down and there's a report there. So the history is there. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
And the courts will look at that as well. If a judge sees, wait a second, I issued a TRO, a temporary restraining order. Now I've issued a restraining order, and this guy keeps violating the restraining order.
Mm-hmm.
We've extended it now. It was for 3 months. Now it was 6. Now it's for a year. Now, and trust me, you're going to ultimately get a judge as well that says, okay, yes, you're not just violating the restraining order. You're stalking now. You're upping your game. I'm going to up mine as well.
Yeah.
So it's hugely important to be, to champion your own cause in that regard.
Okay. So let's see. What do you think communities like San Bernardino need most when it comes to preventing and responding to domestic violence?
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's just, urban areas historically have much higher levels of domestic violence related issues because there may be more drug or alcohol usage going on within those communities. You may have higher degrees of poverty, which creates more stress and issues within the household. Also, unfortunately, when you have those issues, the victim may not be able, even though she wants to get away from this. She wants to get away from this abusive relationship. She feels as if she has nowhere to go.
That's a lot.
She doesn't have any resources available, and I know that you've previously had on guests from House of Ruth, and who do tremendous work in providing that kind of last chance resource. Oftentimes, officers will say, do you have a friend or family member that you could stay with tonight? And we automatically assume that, well, everybody has somebody, but that's not always the case. It's just not always the case.
That's what keeps a lot of the victims there, that they don't have anybody.
And you have to have those resources available. You have to have officers putting pen to paper. You have to have officers making arrests when it's required. And certainly domestic violence isn't one that in the past officers may have been more dismissive and but you'll find yourself potentially arrested yourself if you don't act on a domestic violence response as a police officer.
Oh, wow.
You're breaking the law.
Okay.
If there is obvious signs of domestic violence going on and the officer walks away from it, that officer has committed a crime and will be prosecuted and will be fired. So you don't find officers generally goofing around with that anymore. And particularly one of the things that the state got right. I don't always believe in everything that our judicial system here in California has done. I can say that now that I'm retired, but one of the things they got right was enacting 243E1, which was domestic battery, because domestic violence, the verbiage under the penal code statute of 273.5 was that it had to be a traumatic injury. Certainly that's open for interpretation.
Okay.
Somebody comes up and shoots you or stabs you, that's a traumatic injury. Okay. But you get punched in the eye, is that traumatic injury? Maybe yes, maybe no, depending upon who's
the person.
Yeah, depending upon how you interpret it, how hard was the punch, how big's the bruise, what. So there was a lot of open interpretation there. And when 243 was enacted in the late 80s, that became domestic. It basically was domestic battery. So now it's any report of violence, no matter how slight. Okay. So, you could have a nick on your nail or something, on your knuckle or something like that. And,
right. If you have a scratch on you.
Yeah. And it's not a felony, it's a battery, but still could potentially, the officers are required to document that. And also, you know what? Maybe this is something we need to take you out to be booked into West Valley for, just to have you sober up. Maybe have you,
get your thoughts together.
And decide you need to calm down.
Okay. Now, what gaps do you see the system that make it harder for the victim to get help they need?
You know what? I'm probably not going to go there because I don't know right now.
Okay, because of everything's changed.
Yeah, with a lot of the changes we've had, I will tell you that one of the problems that we have is the state has not been as fiscally responsible as they could and should be on all matters. And so one of the first things that gets cuts is funding to places like House of Ruth that we were talking about. Yes. And that's problematic. So we need to have other outlets involved. We need to certainly have courts when they're presented with viable cases, not just saying, our caseload's too big. Yeah. And then ultimately I'm an advocate for, if you've committed the crime, then you're ultimately going to do, maybe not all the time, but at least a portion of it, to have some truth in sentencing, to where these people have a little bit more deterrent from, you're putting me in jail, I'll be out in 30 days. And guess what? I'll beat your ass again.
That's how they.
And it's like, and by the way, it's going to be a much worse beating. Right. And so, I think it's a number of different things. Okay.
As someone who has seen the worst and the best of humanity in these cases, what gives you hope?
You're probably asking the wrong guy. I'm pretty fatalistic, unfortunately. I think the end game's already started.
Yeah, I believe it.
I think our Lord has already said, you guys have screwed up enough.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for coming in and giving us a little bit of insight as to in your perspective and, sharing with us. Thank you for your service and everything you've done. Thank you guys for tuning in to episode 27 of Horizon Podcasts. Stay tuned for episode 28. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the comments. Catch us on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Thank you, guys.
This episode is brought to you by Guerrilla Marketing, a full-service marketing agency that helps brands, businesses, and creators bring their ideas to life. Guerrilla Marketing is all about creativity with purpose. They don't just make content. They craft experiences that get people talking, from social media campaigns to large-scale activations. They know how to make your brand stand out in a crowded world. And here's the part I love. They also offer beautiful professional studio spaces, just like you see in this one here. So whether you're starting your own podcast, filming a commercial, or just need a high quality content space for your business, they've got you covered. So if you're ready to take your brand to the next level, make sure you hit up Guerrilla Marketing on social media.